Hey, we're live. All right. Hello, and welcome back once again to the Game Master's Craft. I'm your host, Richard Quiner. We are live. We have another guest today. Today we're with Brian Gomiz of the Bearded Nerd Media. He is here with us. We're going to talk a lot about world building. We're going to talk about some of the future of tabletop role-playing games, and we're just going to have a good conversation, so stick around. All right. Brian, you are live now. Welcome to the stream. Now you're unmuted. Um, as we said, you are a world builder. You are a game master, obviously. Introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us what kind of content you make and kind of your niche, so to speak.
Hey, folks. Well, I'm Brian Gomiz. As Richard said, I am the bearded nerd. I guess the bearded face of the Bearded Nerd Media group. And basically, the content that we create here, and I say we because there are other people, that support me and that help me, and that's the beauty of the D&D community, right? Like we're all helping each other. But I make content that helps people become game masters, but helps people become world builders and storytellers. So I want to help the audience, come up with ideas for their D&D game or their, RPG game, or even if you are a writer and an author or whoever, come up with ways to influence that as well. I'm also starting to stream that and see, how I actually kind of the behind the curtain type thing as well. So that's pretty much what I do besides, talking about the latest news and talking about my opinion. Because again, all this maybe it's my opinion. But that's really what I talk about. I really try to help the community out.
All right. So it sounds like you got a lot of things going on your hand and a lot of bowls of baking bowls. That's not a good analogy. Um, What is your favorite activity when it comes to that? So you're talking about world building, playing games, coming up with stories. What is it that you gravitate towards most?
I would say, and that's a great question. I would say that my passion is world building and lore, and coming up with why is it this way? When someone has a question about the world that we're playing in, well, why is it this way? Why, I love coming up with that and creating the story behind it and coming up with with the answer for that. I have to say that is what makes me just love D&D.
All right. So a lot of the world building, and we have talked briefly before. You are working on your own world that you,
Correct.
if I remember, you're trying to, or you're working towards publishing it eventually,
Correct.
right?
Correct. So,
Tell me about that.
so right now the Terracona project is the one of the first continents of the world of Ecopia. Ecopia is my homebrew universe, so to speak, and Terracona is the world where dragons and dragonborn live. Essentially, in my world, dragons and giants fought against one another during like the creation period. So you see a lot of kind of you see a lot of draconic and giant type influence in this game. And in
Mm-hmm.
this, it's going to be something where you can plug and play, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted it to be something where folks could take this, essentially supplement, and it's going to have an adventure through it, right? It's going to have, we're thinking levels 1 through 5 or 1 through 10, kind of like how Curse of Strahd does 1 through 10. We're thinking of doing something similar like that. You can play in the world and then,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of put it away on the shelf, or you can drop it into your own world. Just basically provide folks with something where they can play it, they can take elements of it. Let's say if there's I'm going to hint towards certain classes that we're creating and certain cool things that we're working on. You can, if you don't want to play the module at the moment because you're really in debt, like you're into your homebrew, you know what, take the class, or take a class or whatever that you want
Mm-hmm.
and use it. So it's really going to be something where you can quite literally pick apart however you want to use it.
Right, I think that's a big appeal of a lot of modules is,
For
I mean,
sure.
I don't know a whole lot of people who've run modules cover to cover successfully. I know a lot of people who've started, and I know even more people who tear them apart in that way. Um, doing that, where have you drawn inspiration for your world? What have you torn out of other things to put in your fantasy world?
That's a great question. Lord of the Rings. I've especially I'm just gonna say Tolkien. Tolkien
Mm-hmm.
took a lot from that. I mean, the elves in my homebrew world are very aesthetically similar to the elves in Middle Earth. They're also I kind of took some of the essences of elves, for example, like the immortality part
Mm-hmm.
to it. I apply it to my world. However, I mean, there's I not that the D&D lore is bad. I love it, but I just take some of the elements. I love George R. R. Martin's work with the Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
That whole series does a really great job at bringing realism to a medieval fantasy world
Mm-hmm.
and a low magic world. So I take that aspect and take, how should I interact or how should I interject a low fantasy setting
Mm-hmm.
into a medieval fantasy world? That's also a great source of inspiration. And honestly, things I read, comic books, I'm a huge comic book fan. So certain elements of that I take. But I take mostly from books
Mm-hmm.
and reading.
Nice. So books you get a good read. Um, Tolkien, of course, he's a classic. I think everyone
For sure.
draws inspiration from Tolkien, and it's interesting. You mentioned working with low magic, or the
Mhm.
low magic kind of fantasy worlds are not something you see a lot in Dungeons and Dragons because of the
No,
character classes. Like Dungeons and Dragons is a high magic.
for sure.
Everyone can cast a spell at some point. Um, in your homebrew world or in your home games, like have you found any special ways to run low magic kind of settings to make them a little more interesting, and or do you tend to drift back towards the higher magic kind of worlds when you run your own homebrew stuff?
So funny that you asked that, actually. I'm running players through kind of the silver age of my world where the magic is low.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is actually a great time to answer that. Basically, what I, basically, and for the audience out there listening, who may or may not be my players, heads up. I typically like to run low magic from a very realistic standpoint. If you are able to cast a spell, if you receive your power from the divine, then you have to maintain your relationship with the divine. If you are a paladin, you have to maintain your oath, because through your oath you are granted your magical powers. Same thing with pretty much like the warlock. If you are a sorcerer, then something inside you is coming up. There has to be an explanation. Now, if
Mm-hmm.
you're a wizard, and depending on the country, that's something I kind of emphasize is magic may be seen as a good thing and people are looking into it. I look at it like technology.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell anyone, if you want low magic, think of how technology boomed. Some places did not, they did not want the technology. They didn't want to improve just because of how it could impact tradition in their culture.
Yeah.
That's how I approach magic. I say, okay, well, magic is a new thing. It may be scary to certain people. So my players are aware that if they do use magic in whatever form, unless it's, divine magic,
Mm-hmm.
then they have to be sure and be ready to explain, well, I'm learning this magic, or hey, let me show you this thing. So that way, and that also feeds into the interaction with the NPCs, causing tension and drama within the narrative.
That's interesting. I like your perspective on looking at it as towards technology, because
Mm-hmm.
that is something we kind of take for granted nowadays.
For sure.
I imagine you're around the same age as me. We grew up in the time when computers were very expensive and not all accessible in the home, and
What
we
was the
grew
internet?
into this age where we keep a computer in our pocket
Yep.
most of the time, or even on our wrist if we have like a smartwatch,
Yep.
and those have more power than the computers we grew up with,
Yep.
being around. And that really, in my mind, that has impacted, the technology boom and how things are affected. Makes me look at that in my games as well. So I like that you're looking at your low magic as kind of a technology breaking point, I guess we could say,
Sure.
where it could go one way, it could go another. I think that's really interesting. In your worlds, though, do you also include the purely scientifical technology? Scientifical? That's not a word, but Do you
scientific.
include, like mechanical technology, or do you tend to focus
Sure.
more on the magic side of things?
So in my world, the gnomes of my world are steampunk Rome. If
Okay.
that, so they don't believe in any deity. They believe in science. They believe that magic is not. They understand that there's magic, but technology is superior to them. So
Hmm.
they are the scientists of my world. They're the dwarves. It is said in my world that the dwarves gave them the idea, gave them the ability to craft, but they perfected it.
Oh.
The men are very proud in my world, but they believe in technology. They are technocentric. They
Hmm.
don't they don't adhere to any gods. They have an empire, again, steampunk Rome. So you do see flying ships, but it's not nothing's magical. They just think that that's almost they have a stigma towards it.
Hmm.
So that's where I do have one specific nation that is just technology, and that's it.
Interesting. And have you found, or if you are doing that, have the players had, what kind of interactions have the players had with that? If they are characters coming from nations that are more magic centric, do they tend to run into kind of an anti-magic sentiment when they're in that country, or are they generally welcome? How do you bring the players into a country like that?
So essentially, what I do, and I kind of do this for every country, is there are people who are going to be sympathizers, right, within the nobility class, within the middle class, and the low class,
Hmm.
and then there are going to be people who are neutral and who are going to say, well, as long as it doesn't affect me, I'm okay. And then there are going to be people who are opposed to it, and
Okay.
that's kind of how I run everything. In this specific case, there are senators within the Gnomish Empire that they they think that people should explore magic because it has benefited
Hmm.
uh, other people. But then there are other NPCs that believe, well, you know, magic has prolonged life that should not be prolonged. There's a natural, kind of flow of life, and it
Hmm.
should be respected. So there's a lot of different points where the players right now haven't had to really interfere with that because they not that they want to stay away from that area. It's just right now in the world, the gnomes are pretty much, well, if you are a magic user, you kind of have to go through a lot. You can't just
Hmm.
sneak in type thing.
Okay. So
So
it's
that's
kind of
kind of where they're at
customs.
right now. Yeah, there is like they definitely have kind of like a customs area or
Hmm.
department within their empire that kind of monitors that thing because again, they are very cautious with it.
Hmm. Interesting. That's kind of cool. I'm really interested in that. And you said you're working on writing that into a book of sorts, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I'm working. So Terracona is going to be the Dragonborn world, but then I'll
Hmm.
have the different people within my homebrew world that basically. So you'll have the world of dragons, the world of dwarves, all that good stuff. So actually, hopefully soon, in the next 10 years or so, and again, long term thinking,
Yeah.
there will hopefully be an ebook of some sort, unless you really want, the tangible physical copy. There will be an ebook where you can play in my version of these races within that are D&D 5th edition compatible.
All right. Well, best of luck with writing that. I
Appreciate it.
now learned that writing is a lot of work.
Yes, it is.
It's a lot. So good luck. Um,
Thank you.
segueing from talking about your homebrew world,
Hmm.
I wanted to know, and this is another question I was asking everybody: is as
Hmm.
a game master, what is your biggest challenge? What do you see as your weakness?
So my weakness, to be 100% honest, is kind of making well, I actually don't mind admitting a couple if you don't mind.
Oh, go for it.
I compare myself to others. That's one. That's my biggest one. I compare
Hmm.
myself to other DMs. Hence, I speak about it a lot and tell people, "Hey, don't do this," because
Hmm.
I can, from experience, it's not worth. We are all equally and genuinely great game masters because if our players are having fun, we're doing a great job.
Yeah.
But I compare myself. I think it's kind of natural. I also tend to really, really, really invest in something, and then my players like completely like wipe it clean,
Hmm.
and I get a little hurt sometimes because I'm like, dang, I worked really hard and you either didn't like it. And again, that's more of a psychological thing. That is, I have to make sure that it's, that I remind myself, hey, they're not attacking you. They're not disliking you personally. They just did this thing, and that's okay.
Mm.
It's totally okay. So those are probably the two things that I would say right now. Like,
Okay.
I
I,
need to work on.
right. So I wanna look at that last one you just mentioned because that is a common problem.
Mm,
Everyone when they start running games, they you spend hours preparing for a session just to have the players not look at the cart with the dead horses on the roads to Phandalin,
yep.
right? And then your 4 hours of preparation has gone to waste and you're stuck improvising.
Yep.
Knowing that and recognizing that you do feel that way sometimes, how or what steps do you take, or what is your process to, get past that, get back on the horse, and keep, making your stories?
So basically, what I have done now is I've changed my way of thinking. I focus on the players first, and then the rest of the game.
Okay.
I focus. There's a plot right now in my main campaign, my kind of the golden era of the world. There is a main plot. Whether the players follow it or not, it's up to them. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to continue happening whether or not they pursue it, and I'm okay with that because that's how I'm having fun, and it provides the players a way to interact with the world as things develop. So I know my players right now, whether they hear this or not, in the regard, spoiler alert, that's why I say it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things is that I don't care if they pursue the main quest. This isn't a video game.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I go back to the reality of things, right? Things around our world and in real life happen without our influence or with our influence. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. It continues to happen. I apply the same rule. So I focus on the characters first. I focus on my players and what they want to do, and then create sessions and things like that from there.
Okay, so in doing that, then how has the reaction from the players been since you started doing that? Knowing that you probably didn't come to them and say, "Hey guys, I'm changing how I'm running things here,"
Mm-hmm.
but have you seen a difference in how they respond to a certain session based on your preparation
Absolutely.
techniques?
Absolutely. They get more involved because they feel involved. They feel like they're not just, oh, we're here, the party meets at a tavern. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not, it's more of oh, I'm in this tavern because, and this is actually things that we just went through. One of the players, he's a dragonborn paladin. He kind of said, well, I don't know why I'm in this tavern specifically. It
Mm-hmm.
was one of the first session, and I was like, "Oh, you don't know? Hey, read this in your item. Like read this little note that I sent you right here." And it's actually I role played it as the bartender, and it's from his sister, who in his backstory, he's trying to find his sister.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, "Oh, now I have stake in it. Now there's value
Mm-hmm.
because I have something to lose in this." So now they feel like they are a part of it, not because they have to, but because they want to. They have something that they're vested in. And then the other players, because they love this character and they love this person, they want to support that person.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, "Oh, I want to do this thing and help that person while I'm pursuing my own goals." It actually works. It's actually pretty symbiotic. I'm not gonna lie.
Nice. I like that. So going to a slightly lighter question,
Mm-hmm.
still in that vein though, what is your favorite storytelling trope that you actually like to use?
Oh man, there's a couple. So probably my favorite, and I've used this before. You have like clearing a dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite, because a lot of times that can lead towards the kind of bigger. You could do a lot with it.
Mm-hmm.
The classic dungeon dive, in my opinion, is something that every game master should run their players through. I think just to have fun.
Yeah.
There can be a point to it, right? To there can always be a point to something, but I've always had the classic, there are goblins in this dungeon that you have to clear out, or there's a quest board here and you can choose a quest. I kind of keep that classic trope just because it's a fantasy game.
Yeah.
We all like that, but there sometimes it's okay to just kind of have a hack and slash game.
Yeah, and I think that's good, mixing that in when you do have a heavier role play type scenario.
For sure.
Then the players come back the next time and they're like, oh, it's just a dungeon crawl, or we get to relax a little bit. Having played in several games where we get in that mindset and we go for weeks, and every week is an intense emotional roller coaster. It's nice to have that moment where you're like, I'm just going to shoot it with an arrow.
Yep,
and
exactly. You're going to have that moment where, it's great to have an X amount of hour session where you're saying, oh, I just have to hack and slash the baddies. Okay, cool. Now I just get to throw dice, have fun. If you like Dwarven Forge and you have some Dwarven Forge, or you have some home, some terrain of any kind, you put it up, or even if you have a map, it's cool to just draw a map, have some minis out, or Theater of the Mind, but you're just hacking and slashing, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's fun to do that.
Yeah. Cool. That's good to know. I also enjoy a good dungeon crawl. Before we went live, we mentioned technology and your work and how you are looking towards the future of role-playing games. Though it doesn't always lead to better theater of the mind, I think the current situation in the world where everyone's staying at home, this quarantine thing, has led to a lot of technology being used. There's a lot of people just now noticing the virtual tabletops, which has surprised me. But we mentioned there is a thing of augmented reality role-playing is coming up, and I want to know just your thoughts on where do you see the future of the virtual tools for role-playing games going, in your opinion?
That's a fantastic question, and I appreciate it because I don't get to talk about it as often as I like. I get to talk on my show as often as I want, so I like to talk about it, as you can tell. I think that, well, first off, let me just say this. We are at the tip of the iceberg in regards to tabletop gaming and video gaming. Okay. So again, let me repeat that. We're at the tip of the iceberg. We see shows like Critical Role, Acquisitions Incorporated, and we see a lot of great successful streams. And there's a lot of, let's be honest, there's a lot of money in the field right now, and a lot of potential, which is great because that means that shows like Critical Role, which they signed on for, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 seasons of Amazon.
I thought 2, yeah. I'm not in the know so much about that.
Well, they also made $10+ million with their Kickstarter. I mean, it's insane. So, with that being said, there is money there. Now, with money comes advances in technology. Yeah. And augmented reality, as you can see if you played Pokemon Go, great game by the way. Me as a fan of, I'm just a huge nerd. So, but I've studied Pokemon Go and I've seen that, if they're doing this for Pokemon, imagine you have your phone or some sort of device where you get to use augmented reality, and guess what? Now you have a giant, fire dragon mini that instead of having to paint it and do whatever, now you have this thing where you basically have a pre-programmed or even, real-time programmed dragon that's fighting the players and their characters, but in an augmented reality environment. I think that's going to be one of the things you'll see in the next 10 to 15 years. You're going to see not the replacement of things like miniatures and terrain, but it's going to elevate it. There's going to be a time where people are still going to paint minis, people are still going to buy minis, but perhaps you're going to have your mini, and that's, when you scan your mini, now you can use your augmented reality, you can use augmented reality to move that mini as if it were in a video game of some sort. I think that's going to be an option. I also think that it's going to be able to display terrain. If you don't, let's say you don't have physical terrain, I mean, there's a reason why we still like tangible things. Yeah. But let's say you put out, you have a tablet of some sort, it pops out this these dungeon tiles in an augmented reality, and you move your minis through it, or you move your characters through it. Like it's going to elevate tabletop gaming in general.
Yeah. For me, have you seen Magic Leap or
I've
heard?
heard of it.
You've heard of it.
I've heard.
Okay. I had a chance once to play with it for about a half an hour in an office, and it was a really interesting device where, the processing power for it is not a lot. It's about the same power
Mhm.
as a cell phone, but it hooks up and it's a headset augmented reality. So you don't have to hold things. Because for me, looking at D&D and the current augmented reality setup they have now, they have one called Ardent Roleplay is I think the most in the limelight kind of augmented reality thing.
Yeah.
But you always have to hold your phone, right? You have to have it and you
Yeah.
have to look at the screen. To me, I look at that and I'm like, that's a little weird. I don't know how I feel about it because I haven't tried it myself. But
Yeah.
Magic Leap
Mm-hmm.
interacts with the entire environment. You wear this thing on your head and you have like a little controller, kind of like a VR controller, and you can pick things up and move them around and do this whole thing in the world just around you. And it's still augmented reality. And I looked at that and I was like, that is going to be the future of D&D. That's where people will really shine.
And then you have things, you're going to have things like elder games that are going to come in and say, hey, here is this other form of augmented reality that you can use. I think
Mm-hmm.
virtual reality is going to be the other thing, but honestly, I can see virtual reality and augmented reality is going to take kind of the space, well, from an or from an augmented reality space. What's going to happen is that, let's say you have a friend that lives in California and you live in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're going to have in an augmented reality maybe type of headset, you can see your friend and play D&D with them.
That would be
That's
cool.
probably, yeah, that's going to be awesome. And then the virtual reality, I can see that more with things like World of Warcraft, right? MMORPGs. You kind of go into the, like, if you want to talk anime, you go into like the Log Horizon, Sword Art Online, that whole, like,
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna full dive into a video game MMORPG. And at that point, it's like, that's like you're basically living the D&D life. But yeah, no, I see a lot of great things in technology. It's only going to elevate the game.
Speaking of elevating, then, because this just made me think of like a lot of people like Dungeons and Dragons because it is very much a social
For sure.
interaction thing and it's a physical game. When you ask people, I believe 9 out of 10 people are like real dice are better than a computer program, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone loves the physical thing.
For
How
sure.
do you think these different virtual reality, augmented reality stuff, how do you think that would actually end up impacting that side of the game, the physical nature, or even the storytelling? You could even go into like how can that be impacted based
Well,
on that needs, I guess. Yeah.
I totally understand what you're saying. From a storyline, world building, storytelling perspective, it's gonna elevate it. It is going to improve it because now, you can say, well, you smell the moss in the forest, and there might be something that triggers that. You might have AI that's listening in and using whatever algorithm to trigger the scent of moss that you just said.
Mm.
That's going to be something. But then again, from a kind of brick and mortar or mortar. What am I
Brick
saying?
and mortar. Yes.
Yeah, brick and mortar. So it's right at the corner of Sauron and the Twin Towers. No, I'm kidding.
Yes.
So sorry, folks. I can't speak common today. But I think what's going to happen is like the physical dice companies, all that. A couple of things are going to happen. They're going to have to innovate, right? They're always
Yeah.
going to have to innovate to say, okay, we're going to do this. And even just being traditional is innovating because you may be going against the status quo. I know for a fact I'm going to still be buying minis until I drop. So that's just me. That's part of the hobby that I love. But in an AR VR type world, if from an AR perspective, you might have something where you buy a mini, scan it, and then it becomes your character, and you can do all these things to it. You might actually have an AR version of your mini that you've kind of programmed. Like, Hero Forge allows you to create customized minis. there might be a program where you can customize your character, and then it'll make an AR version that of that character, and then that's your mini. Essentially, you can pretty much direct it to go wherever. And then from a VR perspective, again, I honestly see us more being in the actual game. So you're going to roll up a character, right? You're going to roll up a character sheet. And again, this is way into the future of VR, but you'll see that you will become your character.
So it'd be like
a Ready Player One situation.
Yeah, I could see something like that.
Because who would not want to be a dragonborn breathing fire, or acid, or light, or whatever?
Yeah,
who wouldn't want to do that?
When I read Ready Player One, that was like, oh, that could be crazy, and you can see the future of the VR heading in that way.
For sure, that's honestly the more probable aspect of it. There's going to be people who are going to jump in and just live there, and then there are going to be people who choose to have their time there, but it's also they're going to choose to be outside. So it's going to because again, when you tell someone to go right, they go left, and there's still something sacred to the gaming table, to bringing folks together, having snacks, playing together, and just being in each other's company.
Yeah, that I think is something that will never go away.
No, it's in us. We as humans, just that we have a need for social interactions.
Yeah. And interesting thing, this pandemic and the quarantine, I think, has made that even more noticeable.
For sure.
With people who I hadn't, don't talk to very often normally, suddenly then reach out and be like, oh, we miss you guys. Let's hang out. This kind of thing. Let's get on a Zoom call. Yep. And you see that more now. So it definitely shows that humans crave that social interaction.
For sure.
They need that person-to-person contact.
For sure.
Changing subject, I did warn you about one question that I was going to ask, so this is that time. I want to know, for new game masters, even old ones, whichever you like, but what is your number one tip for people just getting started that might be something that you haven't or that you wish you had known when you first started playing?
I'm going to go back to the don't compare yourself to others. I wish that I would have listened to that a little bit more. Don't compare yourself to others. When you see someone as talented as Matt Colville, Matt Mercer, Chris Perkins, Jeremy Crawford, Satine Phoenix, all the big hitters, you don't want to compare yourself to them because they've been doing this for years. So with that in mind, do what you can. Do what's practical. If it's practical for you to come up with the skeleton of your world or your session, even, let's break it down a little bit more granular. If it's better for you to come out with the skeleton of your session and then just have kind of random tables of innkeepers and barmaids and this and this and that, go for it. If you want to be the person that has, a bio for every person, kind of like George R. R. Martin, where you're like, oh, this is, Robert Baratheon, first of his name. You can do that if that's your thing, but don't stress yourself out because you feel like you have to do it. You don't have to do anything. Just do what you want.
That is really good advice. That's something I also say a lot is, don't compare yourself. So building on that though, what would you tell, knowing you're not supposed to compare yourself, what tip would you give a DM? Let's say a new DM shows up at a game table and one of their players does the classic Matt Mercer does it differently kind of situation. How would you, what advice would you give for a dungeon master to handle that situation?
Well, if I was there, I would probably interject because I am that person. Say, well, he or she or they or whatever, they're not Matt Mercer.
Right.
That's it. That I would first say, you're not Matt Mercer or you're not this person. Congratulations. Not that Matt Mercer. No, it's just that even Matt Mercer would say, you're not me.
Yeah.
And you might not enjoy a game that I run. Everyone thinks that they would, but they might not. So I would say, find your own style. Take what you like from certain things, but find your own style and be bold about it. Communicate with that person and say, hey, you know what? I understand that I'm not Matt Mercer, but I have my own style and I'm new to DMing. So I would appreciate actually any critique that you would offer me. Again, be empathetic. Be empathetic
Mm-hmm.
to that person because maybe that's their experience or interaction with D&D or tabletop gaming in general it might be through Critical Role.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the first place and again, kind of a food analogy, the first place that you go to have pizza and you absolutely love that pizza place and it's your favorite pizza place, not because it's great quality, maybe it is, but it might be just because that was your first one, it tasted great, and there's other psychological factors to it. Same thing with D&D. That person might love Matt Mercer because Critical Role was a part of their, all the things. And in this case, you just have to say, well, wait a minute. First off, I'm not Matt Mercer. Second, I have my own style and I'm still developing my style. And third, anything that you would, if there's anything I can critique or improve on, rather, let me know. But then go from there. And obviously, if it continues and persists, you kind of have to say, well, listen, that's kind of when you're bordering that toxic player,
Yeah.
that toxic player syndrome where you push certain things for a certain reason and you're just kind of you're teetering on that role.
Mm-hmm. But it's not where you want to be.
No, not at all. And and at the end of the day, man, like toxic players are there and it's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be empathetic to them. You have to I would even go as far as to say you have to hope and you have to hope that they find a game that they enjoy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I firmly believe there's a table out there for everyone.
100%.
And it might not be my table, it might not be your table, but I think everyone has a dungeon master out there that would fit perfectly for what they want in the game. And every dungeon master has a group of players that would fit perfectly for their style.
100%.
And we just need more people to try dungeon mastering.
Yeah, try it.
To get out there and do it. It's always fun. Last question, because I forgot to do this at the beginning, and I feel a little bad. I wanted to know your history in the game, how you got started, how long ago did you start playing, and when did you start being a game master?
So my parents immigrated from Cuba to the States back in the 60s. And, growing up, and I apologize if you hear any dogs barking, but I basically grew up in a place where, in South Florida,
Mm-hmm.
where it really wasn't popular. Dungeons and Dragons, again, I will let people know, when I was growing up, Dungeons and Dragons was not a thing. It
Mm-hmm.
was something that, like, my friends, we had someone's older brother had the original, red box, and we peered through it and we were like, oh, cool. Look at these minis, because there were just like a hodgepodge of minis there, so that's probably where it all started. And we were told, hey, that's like, we've heard some really weird things from about Dungeons and Dragons. I would not recommend it. So I was like, okay, sure. So we played kind of like a hodgepodge version. We really just like pretended we were in like Middle Earth. And then we always, I remember as a kid, I was always like, my imagination was running wild. So with my toys, whatever toys I had, I was creating battle scenes and battle maps. Now that I think about it, like, if you remember the green plastic army soldiers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I had like buckets full of them because I was a very lucky, my grandmother was the bomb. But like, she was awesome, and she would like find them randomly or give them to me like for the holidays. But anyway, I was creating battle maps without even knowing it. I was taking they had those same green plastic army men, they had a medieval version, and I was making battle maps. I was creating stories and worlds. I was playing Lord of the Rings. And when I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I got heavier into comic books, and friends of mine said, oh, there's this thing called Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, I remember that. Cool. I'll hang out and play. I did a little bit and was just like, okay, whatever. Game Master was like, I don't even remember, but I don't remember their name, but I remember that they ran a very strict game.
Okay.
And I was like, it's okay. I'm gonna play with my PlayStation. And it wasn't. I got into college, and they were playing 3.5, and I was like, oh, cool. And my friends that I play D&D with on Behold a D&D podcast, which is run by my closest friend Sam. We all played 3.5 together. We all ran some adventures. I was in the middle of my thesis as well, so that was kind of my escape when I would watch people play and when I would see them play in the dorm and whatnot. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I started to heavily game master 3-4 years ago. I got married in 2016, and my wife's like, you have a lot of you really love nerdy stuff and everything. And she was like, that's just D&D's not her thing,
Hmm.
but she's been extremely supportive with it. So really, I started to increase my collection when we got married. I started to play more. I started to game master more because my wife supported me. She's always been she's an English teacher. So for her, she's about having kids write their stories.
Hmm.
And especially in middle school. She's a middle school English teacher. So she has always encouraged her kids to write and to read and to explore. So as my wife, she has been my number one supporter and saying, hey, listen, go do this, go do that. This is really good for you, and this is really cool that you can do this. So I mean, I've been head deep into D&D for the past 4 years, but it's always been a part of my life, man. Fantasy has always been a part of my life in some form or fashion.
All right. That's a good story. That's really awesome that your wife has been so supportive in that regard and pushing you. It's interesting the idea. Like I grew up, I did not do well in school. Like we were on that panel, I
Mm.
mentioned I didn't do homework. I was terrible. English was probably my worst subject in high school. But then I grew up and I fall in love with D&D, and suddenly I'm like, oh, I need to learn to write now. I need to pay attention to
Yeah.
this. Um, so that's kind of neat that you have kind of a built-in support structure in your writing too, as she can, push you a little bit, and she's,
Oh, for
you know,
sure. Push,
I'm sure
critique,
she's a great help.
no, for sure, 100%. She can, when the final product is ready, she will be the one critiquing it.
Nice. And that's always good to have someone who can critique your
I'm
final
very
project.
fortunate. Very
Yeah.
fortunate.
It looks like we have not had any questions, so
No
if anyone
worries.
is watching, we will give them a moment. But I want to know, where can people find you on the internet?
So I
Give us the
have
rundown.
so I'll do this. This is going to be the easiest. Go to Instagram and you will see at the Bearded Nerd Media, you will see my bio. And not to sound cheesy, but click the link in my bio. That is going to have basically a massive kind of link tree of where I'm at, where you can find my podcast, which I moved from one platform to another, and now actually you can hear me on Apple Podcast, Google. You can hear me pretty much everywhere where you consume podcasts. So I would highly recommend clicking the link in my Instagram bio, again, the Bearded Nerd Media, and finding me there. Follow and click that link, and again, you'll find everything there.
All right, so you got podcasts. I know you said you had a live play podcast, not another. What
So
did Behold the D&D
I'm
podcast?
Yeah, so I'm a player in Behold the D&D podcast, which my friend Sam is the dungeon master, game master. And right now we're actually playing two campaigns. We're playing a medieval fantasy, and then we're playing a campaign set in the Star Wars Old Republic universe.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah, it's
pretty
pretty
intense.
cool.
That's kind of
It's a,
cool. The Old
it's a
Republic is an interesting time period.
Very sure. It's a fifth edition Star Wars conversion. So, two particular people that I was reading about, they converted they converted fifth edition to be in the Star Wars universe. It's pretty cool.
That's really neat. I like that. So make sure you guys, the viewers here, make sure you guys go check out the link tree. It is in the description also. I put a link in there to find
Awesome.
anything of Brian. We did get one question now, Brian, because I called him.
Cool.
I called out the audience and someone asked the question. That's how it works. You gotta shame people into interacting.
That's right. That's the best way to do it.
This guy actually, he's been asking questions every day, and this one's a really interesting one that I have to answer no. But he asked, "Do you have any experience with one-on-one sessions?"
Yes.
What are your advice for that?
I love them. So the reason I love them is because, well, and again, I'm going to break it down. You should have one-on-one sessions. The reason being is because you get to focus on that player and give 100% focus and attention. It helps them feel that they are, that they're receiving kind of love and admiration and attention.
Mhm.
So it helps them feel even more invested in the world. And the good thing about this is that you can kind of do a couple of things. So how would I run it? What I would do is this: call that player or let your party know, hey, for downtime activities, I'm going to offer one-on-one sessions, right? So during downtime, you say, hey, these are the things that I want to do. Let's say you have a weekly session. This one-on-one can be via text, via phone, via whatever you want. And you can say, okay, what does your character do during downtime? Oh, I do this, and that. And you can kind of have like a little conversation about what happens, what transpires, and even go into something. You can actually start this session 0. You can say, well, what's your character like? Talk to me about your backstory. Talk to me about how they see themselves and view themselves. So you can actually start it from a session 0 all the way until you end your campaign. It basically, think of it like you're checking up on the character. You are checking up on the player and saying, how do they view themselves here? What's going on in their mind? I would set it up something, if you have that familiarity, like my players, I text them individually and say, hey, where's your character at? What's your character thinking? What's going on? And they'll tell me, or they don't, or they say, hey, you know what? Everything's good. Everything's normal, or everything's, current. Okay. No problem. And then that actually, what one person may go through during a downtime activity may inspire me to say, ooh, I'm going to pursue that in the next session and go from there.
Yeah. Then it gives you more ideas.
Yep, exactly. So for the individual out there who's wondering, even if it's a good idea or how to even do it, I would just say, hey, listen, offer that idea to the party. Just say, hey, I would love to do one-on-one sessions with you all, to advance your character personally. This is a great time also, again, downtime activities to reward, XP or whatever or items for that, downtime activity, that one-on-one session.
Yeah, that is some really good advice. I think that's a really interesting tool that not a lot of DMs really use. Like, I personally have never done a one-on-one type session yet.
I find it very odd because it's almost like and again, maybe it's because my situation, my players, they have more, like, I can schedule a lunch with them during work hours because we all work together. So we can, it's kind of funny. We can't schedule like a D&D session while we're working, but we can have lunch together and we can have a one-on-one session. So that's kind of where it came from, where out of time, for the sake of time, and to say, okay, when we meet for our session, we're not going to piddle around and do all these downtime activities. We're going to kind of focus on the bread, on the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the session.
Yeah, that is really great. That's really great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's where we're going to end this one. So to the viewers, thank you guys for watching. Come back tomorrow. We got another good guest tomorrow. Jason Russell of Critical Dice is going to be on. Brian, thank you for coming in. Again, check him out in the link in the description. It's a link tree of everything that he does, which you do a lot. You do a lot, Brian.
I appreciate it.
And so we will see you guys next time. And Brian, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.